Well, welcome everybody to Archaeology of Connecticut. And to lead our distinguished panel, here's your state archaeologist, Sarah Sportman.
Hi everyone. Welcome to our July show of the Archaeology of Connecticut. I hope you all had a great holiday weekend. I'm here with my co-host, Scott Brady, the president of the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology. And tonight we're joined by special guests Mandy, Ranslow, and Lee West to talk about avocational or volunteer archaeology here in Connecticut. Just to give you a little bit of background, Mandy is a professional archaeologist who currently works as a program analyst and federal highways liaison at the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation in Washington, D.C. She grew up here in Connecticut, did her graduate work at UConn, and got started in archaeology as a student volunteer in the late 1990s before choosing to pursue it as a career. Before moving to Washington a few years ago, Mandy served as the president of FOSA and a board member of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut. She worked with the Connecticut Department of Transportation and in cultural resource management in the state as well. Our second guest, Lee West, is an avocational archaeologist. He works as a senior fire protection engineer at Travelers Insurance, where he's been for 43 years. Lee has been involved with Connecticut archaeology since 1993, and he's worked with the archaeological community in many different capacities. He currently sits on the board of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut, where he serves as newsletter editor and membership coordinator, and he also serves as a liaison between the Archaeological Society of Connecticut and FOSA. So welcome, both Mandy and Lee. Can I just ask you both to tell us a little bit more about yourselves and how you got involved with Connecticut archaeology? I kind of gave the rough overview, but it would be great to know what sparked your interest in archaeology and how you got involved in the community.
I guess I'll go. This is Mandy. I just want to, thank you, Sarah and Scott, for having me on the show. It's nice to be here with Lee. We've known each other for a long time, too. It's just like hanging out with some friends on the phone, I guess. A little bit about myself. Like Sarah said, I have been in Connecticut archaeology in some fashion since 1997. I was actually in high school at the time, and my mom brought home this Connecticut Archaeology Awareness Week poster that had been hanging in the elementary school that she worked in. And in the small print way at the bottom had some contact information for this Office of State Archaeology. And that eventually led me to find out about the newly formed Friends of the Office of State Archaeology. And I've been a member of that group since the year after it was founded, since 1998. So, I guess I started kind of early. In that same year, I also took a non-credit archaeology class at Naugatuck Valley Community College that was taught by Dr. Lucianne Lavin, and she was able to direct me to some fieldwork opportunities that were with the Greater New Haven chapter of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut, which at the time was led by the late Dave Thompson. And I actually got to, as a high schooler, I was really lucky, get my hands dirty for the first time at the Bethany Bog site, which I have vague remembrances of. But I think what I can remember of that was, similar to the work that Sarah and FOSA do. It was a development project that didn't otherwise, require any type of archaeological survey, but there was a site, and they allowed this group of volunteers to go out and excavate it for a summer or two before they built the houses. And that's what really solidified me. That experience solidified that I wanted to do archaeology as a career, and that's what I ended up going to college to do. I'm sure, like every archaeologist or any person, right, we all flirt with this idea of doing archaeology in some exotic place. But honestly, at the end of the day, I found my archaeology home and my archaeology family in Connecticut, and I, got to work with archaeologists who've been volunteering longer than I've been alive. I've got to work for the archaeologists who really laid the groundwork for what professional archaeology is in the state, and I've had the privilege of being on the board of both volunteer groups. So I guess that's my long-winded version of my origin story.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Lee, what about you?
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone, and Mandy, good to talk to you again, too. It's been a while since we've seen each other face-to-face. And So, first of all, Sarah, I wanted to just thank you for inviting me to be on the show, and thanks for giving us avocational archaeologists a chance to talk to the public and tell our story. I suspect most of the audience today is either an avocational archaeologist or someone who's interested and might want to be one. And so it's a great chance for us to sort of explain what the journey is like, what the experience is like, and maybe some other folks will be interested. As to my story, I made my career as a fire protection engineer, and I'm still doing that at Travelers, but I was always interested in history and archaeology, and we bought an 18th century home in Wethersfield, so was always interested in the history around the house and also below the ground around it. But I never really considered that there would be a chance for archaeology here in Connecticut. I always figured that was an old world or Central American sort of activity. In the early 90s, I was driving down Main Street here in Wethersfield past the Webb Dean Stevens Museum, and I saw a bunch of people out in the lawn digging a carefully measured pit and screening the dirt that came out of it, and so I was intrigued. So I walked over and said hi. It turns out that they were members of the Albert Morgan Archaeological Society, which was, at that time, a local chapter of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut. Everyone there was a volunteer, except for a professional or two who was kind of coaching everyone. And it was an opportunity to get my hands dirty and pitch in and learn how it all worked. And I was immediately intrigued. So I joined the Albert Morgan group. I started digging with them. I attended meetings. Pretty soon I was writing their newsletter. One of the professionals who helped the Albert Morgan group was Lucianne Lavin. And Lucianne also was and remains on the board of directors of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut. So Lucy said, "Hey, Lee, why don't you come and join the board of the ASC and start writing our newsletter?" So starting in 1998, I've been on the board of the ASC and continuing to write the newsletters. We not only ASC didn't do digging so much, but they had wonderful meetings with great speakers, professionals, and avocationals who were always telling about the latest discoveries and techniques and state-of-the-art in archaeology, all as it applied here in Connecticut. So I was totally intrigued. I love the meetings, and they get better every year. Eventually, I took on being membership chair, and so as membership chair of the ASC to this day, I'm very happy to spread the word about our organization. I was digging with the Albert Morgan Society until that society closed down, and since then I've been digging with the FOSA group. And I'll have to mention that I haven't made all this journey alone, I'm pleased to say. My wife Carol always loved anthropology. And while she didn't really want to go out and dig on an archaeological site with me, she loves the meetings and the lectures and all the subject matter. And she helps me with newsletter distribution and database management. And we enjoy hosting board meetings in our old house in Wethersfield. So for me, it's wonderful that it's become a family activity. And I'm not the only one. Other people have spouses or children involved, and it is something that interests a lot of people, and that's made the experience a lot richer. So I guess that's my story of how I got here.
No, thank you. And, before we get into talking about this, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't ask Scott to tell his story as well, because he also came to archaeology from another background, another career. So, Scott, would you mind talking about how you got involved a little bit?
I think Scott might have dropped off.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully we'll get him back, and maybe we can have him tell his story in a little bit. I wonder if maybe it was the weather. We're getting some rumbles of thunder up here. Well, okay. Until we get Scott back, maybe we can just carry on a little bit. I thought we could start just talking about some of the background history on avocational or volunteer archaeology in Connecticut, and then kind of move into some of the meat of what we're going to talk about today. But I thought it might be nice to just kind of lay it out a little bit briefly. So just to get started, prior to the 1970s, there were few professionally trained archaeologists in the state. There were a handful of archaeologists at the universities like Yale and UConn. Later, Central Connecticut hired an archaeologist in the 1970s, Fred Warner, and some of the other schools slowly started to get archaeology programs after that. But before that, it was pretty limited. So the first sizable group of students who came out of the graduate programs in the state as professional archaeologists really started their archaeological educations in the 70s. That was when there were more opportunities to do archaeology due to the passage of laws to protect cultural resources threatened by development and the expansion of archaeological programs in universities across the country. But, before that, the bulk of the archaeology was kind of maybe led here and there by professionals on the faculty at Yale or later at UConn. UConn hired an archaeologist in 1963. But other than that, a lot of the archaeology was done by people who were not professionals. And that, many, many years, really starting strongly in the 1930s and going up through the 1970s. So the role of the avocational archaeologist has been incredibly important, at least in the early development of archaeology in the state. Prior to the development of this robust professional archaeology, a lot of the research in the state was done by people who were self-taught and just really interested. They really weren't that different from a lot of the people in the avocational community today. Sometimes they worked with academic archaeologists and sometimes on their own. But things in Connecticut got a little bit more formalized in the 1930s with the formation of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut. And I was wondering, Lee, since you've been involved with the organization for so long, if you could tell us a little bit about the history of the ASC and how it came to be formed.
Sure, Sarah. Glad to do that. As you say, when we started out, a little before my time, it was a largely self-taught group. So the Archaeological Society of Connecticut, or ASC, was founded in 1934. And in those days, there were virtually no professional archaeologists. The people who were interested in archaeology at those times were collectors. They were collectors of Native American artifacts. They really hadn't discovered historical archaeology in those days, so the focus was on prehistoric or pre-contact or Native American archaeology. The first bulletin of the ASC listed the 200 known collectors in the state of Connecticut of Native American artifacts. And of those 200, some 50 formed the ASC to begin with, and then it grew from there. So there was almost no professional guidance at this point for the first 30 years of the ASC. There was really only one professional who had constant influence in the group, and that was Professor Irving Rouse of Yale. But the group often met at Yale and was influenced by Professor Rouse and other academics at Yale. Their mission from the start has been to promote the study of archaeology in Connecticut by encouraging scientific research, by spreading archaeological knowledge, especially by our publications and meetings, to preserve archaeological sites in Connecticut, and certainly by spreading this knowledge to inspire the next generation of professional and avocational archaeologists, which is exactly how things have transpired for the last 80, 90 years. Another purpose of the group was to serve as a bond between archaeologists in Connecticut and elsewhere. And this last aspect, the idea of communicating with archaeologists outside of Connecticut, was really one of the reasons the society was brought together. The year before the ASC was formed, another group was formed called the Eastern States Archaeological Federation. That group is still very much active, and that is a group of the state archaeology societies up and down the eastern seaboard. But in order to be in the Eastern States Archaeological Federation, you had to have a state archaeology society. So that was one reason why the collectors at the time decided to form one, so that we could participate in archaeology outside of our borders. There was one other aspect that was written into the original bylaws, which was very relevant to a group of collectors, and that was that the ASC would discourage careless and misdirected activity. Well, that hits home for collectors, because some people were just interested in getting the coolest artifacts, and they didn't care what they dug through in order to discover them. So one purpose of the society was to encourage scientific investigation of all the evidence under the ground, not just an artifact hunt for collectors. So that has always been a very big part of our educational activity.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in there, it's not really 100% fair to just put that on collectors, because I think up until the 1930s, really, even so-called professional archaeology was little more than collecting. They were digging through sites to find museum pieces, the nicest, the most complete, the most exotic and interesting pieces, and all the other stuff was getting tossed aside with very little analysis of what the context was or what it meant in the broader scheme of things. So, archaeology itself was just kind of getting out of that collector mentality and really starting to embrace more scientific and methodological principles at that time. So I think that that grew together, I think, in the avocational and professional archaeology communities.
Yeah, hey, Mandy, this is and Lee. Thank you for coming on the show. And here, just so you know, the rain, the thunder, and the wind is currently cooperating, and my phone line is currently working. So I'm back with you.
Oh, good. So we were going to ask you before you cut out if you could tell us how you got involved in archaeology. I don't want to cut Lee off in the middle of what he was talking about, but I did want to get your story in here when we were talking about these things.
Sure. I mean, my story's pretty simple. I was able to retire in 2012, and I started doing, as my friends used to say, all that nerd stuff that you had talked about for years. And one of the things that I ran across as I was doing nerd stuff was, at the time was offered by the museum up at UConn of Natural History, a one-week adult field school, which I took. Nick Bellantoni, the state archaeologist, was the lead archaeologist at the site. The staff that worked with us, or the crew that worked with us and kind of were our mentors and guides, were members of FOSA. And I enjoyed that 1 week so much that I just kind of stayed around. I joined FOSA. I was retired, so I had a little bit of free time that I could go out on some of the, a lot of what the OSA responsibilities end up with are sort of rescue operations, salvage operations, where someone comes across a site in the course of putting a pool in their backyard, or digging a walkway, or they find some artifacts on their site, and there's a question as to whether there's a more substantial or more important site that is associated with those artifacts. So I started going out with Nick, and after that I worked with Brian Jones, and currently I'm working with Sarah, and we get to go out and explore all kinds of interesting sites. We do ground penetrating radar studies, which, I don't run machines, I don't quite understand how it works, but I can stand there and help set up grids and I can help direct the correct lineup. I can work with other volunteers that we bring out into the field, teach them some of the techniques that I was taught by members earlier on. So I've really kind of adopted it as my job, even though I'm not getting paid. And I really enjoy it. It's I think that there's a really, and I think Lee had kind of mentioned this before I was cut off, I think most people don't think of Connecticut as having a rich archaeological component, and that's certainly not true in my experience. And then
yeah, definitely.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Lee. Sorry.
Oh no, not at all. You want, Sarah? You want me to pick up with the ASC again?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to get you off your train of thought, but yeah, it'd be great if we could talk a little bit more about it.
Oh, the train veers off the track all the time. That's okay. So the ASC through the 20th century has always been a mix of avocationals and professionals, but mostly avocational folks. And there are archaeological sites and resources in every corner of this state. So, in fact, to investigate those, the ASC developed local chapters in all corners of Connecticut to do local investigations. Some of them are gone now, and some still remain, but they all made a contribution to what has been learned about archaeology. I'll list the 6 major ones. So there was the Albert Morgan Society, basically in the Connecticut Valley. That was the group that I joined first. And Mandy mentioned the Greater New Haven Society, which, guess what, worked in Greater New Haven. There was the Arthur Bastow Society in the eastern part of the state. There was an Archaeological Society of Southeast Connecticut down in the New London area. Those 4 chapters are no longer active. There is also the Litchfield Hills Archaeological Club, which is still active and working in Litchfield County primarily, and they have meetings and have digs and are active. There is also down in Fairfield County a very long-standing group called the Archaeology Club of Norwalk Community College, and that club has always been associated with a program at Norwalk Community College called Archaeology as an Avocation, and that program has been around for decades now, and most of those years it has been taught by Ernie Wiegand. And I just heard yesterday that Ernie is hoping to sign up a new class this fall at Norwalk Community College. So if anyone is down in Fairfield County and is interested in that, you should try to reach Ernie Wiegand and find out if there's room and how that would work. But they have been active all these years and continue to do meetings and digs. So all of these chapters around the state were doing field work all long before the state archaeologist was established as a full-time position. And all of this was before FOSA was founded, which Mandy will pick up with and talk about. But before I leave the early history, so for most of the last century, there are dozens of sites which were excavated by these avocational groups, and very often with professional input and the process carefully documented. And very often the results of these excavations were published in the ASC Bulletin, which has been in continuous publication since 1934, and which is available on the Internet online. So we were, until really the coming of FOSA, the ASC did both hands-on and informational work. Now, FOSA has become more of the hands-on organization, and the ASC is more the information presentation and publication and preservation and meeting organization. So that's sort of the history of ASC, and I'll turn it back to you, Sarah, at this point to continue the story.
No, yeah, thank you. I did want to say just a couple of things about that. The core of what we understand about Connecticut archaeology, a great deal of that work was done by avocational and volunteer archaeologists working with academics, sometimes on their own, because a lot of these people did this, all the time and became incredibly knowledgeable, and, they understood archaeological methods, they knew how to tie the data together. So they really laid the foundation in many ways for what we know about the past here in the state. And I just kind of wanted to talk just a little bit about that in terms of, that work was done as a combination of research projects where people found an area that had archaeological deposits or an important archaeological site, either because something eroded or somebody did some construction work and found it, and they got permission and did a research-driven dig. But they also did a lot of the kind of what used to be known as salvage archaeology. When a site was basically being destroyed by development, they would go in and recover as much data as possible to collect the artifacts and try to understand what was happening there. So even though the site would be destroyed, the knowledge that was there would not, that it would be preserved through, the articles that they wrote, the presentations that they gave, the paperwork that they wrote out from the site. And in that way, they really kind of dovetail with what professional archaeologists do today. I wanted to have Mandy talk a little bit about FOSA, but I was thinking it might be helpful because she's an expert on these things. If she could just give us like a brief overview of the laws and how they developed in terms of cultural resources preservation, to kind of understand how professional archaeology grew out of those laws in the state, and how we kind of evolved from volunteers doing a lot of this work to actually having, professional trained archaeologists that carry out a lot of the work that happens now today. Could you talk to that, Mandy?
Yeah, sure. I think the time frames, and this is just kind of some patterns I'm seeing in my head. I'd be curious to know what other people think. But I see, as Lee was talking about, as the ASC evolved, I think it kind of matches some of the time frames of how, laws came into being enacted and the professionalization of archaeology, and how we, then moved into the late 20th century. So really, it was in the 60s and 70s that most of the laws that still to this day protect historic resources, or at least consider them, were established. And the biggest one of that is the National Historic Preservation Act, which was passed in 1966. And that requires all federal agencies to consider the impacts of their projects on historic properties and do what they can to avoid and minimize those impacts. It does not require preservation, but it does. It encourages a preservation outcome, and on my professional side, that's kind of what I try to foster, that ethic as well. There's also some other laws like the National Environmental Policy Act, which was passed in 1970, and specifically to Connecticut, the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act, which was passed in 1973. They, in essence, expect the same consideration for historic properties before any federal or state actions take place. And then, consideration of archaeological sites is part of that. It's not just, pretty Victorian buildings, which are important, but it's also, what's under our feet that needs to be protected. And a lot of times, to even figure out whether there's a site or not, especially in places like Connecticut, you need to do some type of excavation, some type of archaeological survey to even identify the sites and then to determine if they're eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. So that's when agents, the professionalization of the field started, when agencies started being required to hire archaeologists to go out and determine if there was a site or not, and then if that site was important and needed to be avoided if possible. And Sarah, I think you talked, I don't want to go too in length because I know this is an hours-long radio show, but I think for listeners who are more interested, I think you guys talked to Kathy Lavadia and Dan Forrest about this maybe in a show earlier last year, so people can always refer to that if they want more information. But these laws did really change the landscape of who did archaeology in Connecticut professionally and how sites were chosen for excavation in the latter half of the 20th century. So, I really think ASC was filling in that gap, right, in the 30s to the 60s and 70s when there weren't laws that were affording that protection. But, as we all know on this panel and many of the listeners know, there's a lot of actions also that take place that aren't led by a federal or state agency. And while there are municipalities in the state of Connecticut that do have some protections for archaeological sites, many of the 169 towns do not. So there are still needs for, I guess, what we would call old school, salvage archaeology, for those actions that might impact a site that there really is no other trigger to require hiring of an archaeologist to do that survey. And I think that's largely where, now FOSA fills in that gap where, like Scott said earlier, somebody's building a swimming pool. Well, maybe FOSA can come in for a couple days and excavate that site before they put in that swimming pool because there's not anybody else that's going to do that.
Right, exactly. And there are definitely gaps, right? There's gaps that the laws don't cover. There's projects on private property. There's projects that don't trigger these laws and the kind of review that would require archaeological survey. So FOSA and oftentimes with OSA does do a lot of that work in the state. So that's sort of our little niche, and that's where a lot of the volunteer work happens today. That, and of course, and we also do have more research-driven projects that happen, at a slower pace. They happen multiple years. We're asking particular questions of the archaeological record, trying to study certain sites and time periods and things like that, like the Hollister site, which is one of our long-term projects.
But I think, Sarah, bringing up the research aspect of, what you and FOSA and the volunteers get to do, too, is really important because, that allows then volunteers to see. Well, I don't want to say that, CRM in salvage work can produce real research and data. It's really nice to provide an opportunity for volunteers to see, what it is to just set up, an excavation that you can take your time and investigate real research questions and really, dive into the artifacts and the history of the site you're working on.
Right, exactly. And lots of times, even, the salvage projects and those types of things are interesting for people. A lot of times, the sites where people learn the most and have the most opportunity to really delve into the archaeology are the research projects, I would say, which is why FOSA does several of them. We have several ongoing projects to get people involved with. So, Mandy, could you tell us a little bit about FOSA and how it was formed? What its mission was and its role in Connecticut archaeology. We just talked a little bit about its role, but could you give us a little bit of the background on FOSA?
Yeah, sure. I will say, to talk about, to nod to what Lee was talking about, I think, FOSA and ASC certainly share a lot of, the same moral and ethical grounds where it comes to, being preservation-driven, education-driven. I think we share a lot of that. But FOSA has a unique origin story in that it was really formed as an advocacy group originally. So in the late 1990s, the late June Cook recognized that the Office of State Archaeology was wildly undersupported, underfunded, really needed some help, right? So, she, at least this is the oral tradition I was told, so I hope this is correct. My understanding is that she kind of used the Friends of Dinosaur State Park as the example. She saw this advocacy group as able to lobby the Connecticut legislature for funds, for recognition, for, what it needed to really become a successful operation. And then she brought that to the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology when she formed that. And she, did not do that alone. She did that with a number of people, some of whom are actually still, around and active in their own way today. So FOSA's mission work we have evolved over the last 20 years, admittedly, or at least I won't speak for every member. I have not personally lobbied at the General Assembly But, that's certainly something we could still do if needed. But right now, FOSA provides support to the Office of State Archaeology, which obviously those listeners who have been with the show for a while know that is an office of one woman. So, the office needs as much help as it can get, whether it's through volunteers, funds, buying field equipment, just, helping get the work done, whatever needs to get done. I've seen FOSA volunteers help organize the FOSA library. We had an awesome volunteer in the past, the late John Spalding, just, photograph every day for like a decade plus. So, we have volunteers that do, all types of things, not just the field work. They do lab work, they catalog artifacts, they, some of the most, selfishly, I'm a little biased, but I will say some of the most important work that FOSA does isn't even necessarily the digging. It's the evangelizing the message of archaeological preservation. We have volunteers that do archaeology roadshows and outreach and education events, and really just like getting the message out there to the people of Connecticut who, essentially taxpayer dollars are supporting this work, and showing them that we have a deep, rich history, pun intended, deep, rich history of many different types of archaeological sites. And I think if more people understood how awesome it is, then they would be, on board with this ethic of preservation as well. So FOSA does a lot of things, and I certainly know ASC, and we overlap with ASC on a lot of those missions too these days.
Yeah, and I was going to talk about that a little bit because, we have been kind of focused more on the actual digging part of archaeology as we've talked about these volunteer organizations and development of archaeology. And usually that's what is kind of what draws people in, right? The thrill of the discovery and the ability to go out there and get your hands dirty and actually find something and, be the first person to touch something that nobody's laid hands on in hundreds of thousands of years. It's a pretty powerful thing. But there really are a lot of different aspects to what we do in archaeology, which I think people who follow the show have probably gotten a pretty good sense of at this point. But there's also a lot of different, talents and interests and hobbies that people can bring to the table that are incredibly beneficial to the archaeological community and a way to contribute, and make a mark. Mandy mentioned John Spalding and his photography. The Office of State Archaeology maintains binders for each year and all the different sites that he went out and took photographs on while people were working, and we reference those regularly when we go back and try to understand what happened, on old digs and trying to put things together. Like right now, I'm working with a student to go through some material that was recovered from a colonial cemetery that was disturbed by a gravel mining operation, and we're trying to put it back together and working on a way to get these people reburied. And going back to those photos has been incredibly important for understanding it. So this is, 13 or 14 years down the line, or in this case, I think maybe like 18 years down the line, we're going back to that stuff. So I think that, there are all kinds of skills that people have that could be really useful and could, be a part of this whole process of archaeology. So things like photography, people who are good at making maps, people who have an interest in antiques and material culture and things like that could help in the lab. We have all kinds of historic background research that needs to be done, deed research, photographs, drawings, writing it all up so we can share it with the archaeological community and the public. There's lots of different ways for people to get involved. So I think that, people shouldn't shy away if they're afraid or not even interested in going out and digging holes in the heat, What other skills, I'm trying to think of some other interesting ways that people have brought skills from their own work and hobby and experiences that have helped the process along. I mean, we talked about John Spalding. Can you guys think of any other really good examples?
Yeah, we had a member that is still currently our webmaster who learned hypertext markup language to create a site for us. Otherwise, we really wouldn't have that present. And certainly that website drives a lot of interest in not only FOSA, but archaeology in general, and Connecticut archaeology specifically. We had a couple that was kind of our lead on public outreach for a long time. And one of the things that they were so good at is for every kind of event that they would go and set up, they would create a little diorama or a little model or some props. that were associated with either the time period or the culture or the type of site that was kind of most specific to the where they were presented. Like, for instance, the Hammonasset Festival, the display was different than when they set up at the Connecticut Gravestone Network, another place to reach out to people that are interested in history, and archaeology can really play a role in cemeteries. So the dioramas were just really cool, really neat. And we still have some of them floating around, and I still love to look at them when we're up in the OSA buildings on campus. Mandy, can you think of anybody? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I mean, Ken and Bonnie, what they did with the public outreach stuff is, I mean, I think Kathy's still using those when she goes out to exhibits, and, you know, I think with just Bonnie's artistic mind and Ken's, like, do-it-yourself kind of ability, it's really helped us with our outreach. But, you know, even for, I think, you know, there's an opportunity to really use any skill set. I think even down to finances, like our treasurer, Rita, you know, as a paralegal. You know, I mean, she might not be out in the field every day, but what she's doing for our organization is super important. She's, you know, making sure that we have the funds and that they're, you know, organized in a way that, you know, gets our mission carried out. So I really do encourage, I think, you know, and I know, you know, Sarah was talking about this, we see archaeology as being in the field, but really any ability, anybody, any body shape, whatever, we can be accommodated in archaeology because there's so many different things to do, whether it's in the lab or doing research from the comfort of your own home or, you know, anything like that. We can find if somebody is willing to volunteer, we can find a use for your skill set.
I'd just like to toss in also, Mandy, that there's so many things that we would love for volunteers to do for both organizations. But there is also room in both organizations for armchair archaeologists. Really, I think many of our members are just interested. And for whatever reason, they're not ready to dig or they don't want to go out, but if you're interested in the topic and you join either or both organizations, you're supporting our mission. We use a lot of the funds we raise from memberships for scholarships and grants and to pay for publications, and so there's plenty of room if you just find this interesting but aren't ready to get your hands dirty. We'd love to have you join.
And Leah, I'm going to piggyback off that a little bit and say that, you know, I think that one of the things that has been very important, especially maybe for someone who doesn't want to be out in the field and is just kind of interested in this, is they're more educated. And we've heard from so many members when something's going on in their town or near where they live, because now they understand archaeology and the history of Connecticut a little bit better, that it's been put on their radar screen, and they're sensitive to it at their planning and zoning committee meetings in town when there's development projects being proposed, and they're more active in trying to ensure that those sites are preserved and contacting Sarah's office if they feel that maybe a site is under threat. And that's been a very important benefit of having these people as members.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Sarah.
No, go ahead, Mandy.
So I was just thinking, like, Scott, that's such an excellent point. I think educating the public, and Lee's right, even if you don't necessarily want to do the activity of archaeology yourself, but if you're interested in it, you know, archaeology it's really for the public. What we do, the work that's funded by public funds should then, you know, the public should then be made aware of what was the result of that. And, you know, ASC does a great job with that through their bulletin and the newsletters, and FOSA has newsletters to share this archaeological information with the public, because we need the public to also advocate in the sense that Scott's saying, where if they see something, please let, you know, the state archaeologists know that you found a site, but also just, you know, advocating to maintain the laws we have that protect these sites. I'm not going to get political here by any means, but, you know, we want to make sure that we also maintain the protections that we have. And if the public isn't interested and doesn't know how important it is, they're not going to be able to do that. So I think that's a really good mission that, both in ASC are working together on.
Yeah, and I want to kind of just build off the things that you all were saying about the two societies and the way that they get information out to the public about archaeology. There's the ASC Bulletin, which is the Journal of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut. Both organizations have newsletters. And it's important to know that, not everybody who contributes to these newsletters and the journal are professional archaeologists, right? The avocational community also has a long tradition of writing about archaeology, presenting archaeology, and making it, accessible to other members of the interested community. I'm the current editor of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut's Bulletin, our journal, and in the last issue, probably about half of the articles were written by non-professionals. And they were excellent, and they were important contributions to understanding our past here in our region. So, I would definitely encourage anybody who's interested in that to also, take it to the next level, write about it, talk about it, share it with everybody if you're involved. So I think maybe going forward, just another example of that is a couple of years ago, Mandy and Scott organized a session at the Eastern States Archaeological Federation meeting. It was hosted in New London in Connecticut. ASC co-hosted it with the Archaeological Society of Massachusetts, and Mandy and Scott put together a session at this conference about avocational archaeology. And would you guys be willing to talk a little bit about some of the presentations that you pulled together for that?
Yeah, so actually I organized that one. Scott was definitely in it. I organized that one with Jeremy Pilber, who was
sorry.
No, that's okay. He was, at the time, I was president, I think. I mean, I don't know, Scott, if you were president, but then I've got my time frames mixed up. I think I was still president, and Jeremy was vice president. And we were really excited to have the Eastern States Archaeological Federation conference in Connecticut, because it often is not. So we wanted to use that as a venue to really highlight how avocationals have, meaningfully contributed to archaeological research in the state. And we had this great mix of avocationals and professionals who have worked with avocationals, just talking about their experiences and the sites that they've worked on. And Scott, I think that was the first time I saw a picture of you and your trappings from your work life before archaeology in your presentation.
Yeah, I did 5-alarm archaeology was the title, because I figured a trowel with a bunch of fire behind it would be a really cool graphic to start with. And I just kind of talked, not about a specific site, but kind of about the organization and how to work with avocationals in an organizational role, kind of using what I had done in my prior life. I was a firefighter for the city of Hartford. And, we had a paramilitary organization. There was a lot of command and control. There was a bunch of management systems and assignments of specific work to specific groups. And when I joined FOSA and really started to get out into the field, I saw a lot of those similar concepts being used by archaeologists. Maybe that's why I liked it so much, because I really did love my job. And now I see the same kinds of things, the same kind of systems being used in archaeology that we use in the fire department. And I think that was an attractive transition for me into a really fun project that then added, with a lot less risk than my previous occupation, the ability to look at history. And that was a really cool thing for me to see. And I was very happy and very pleased and honored that you guys chose me to speak at the conference. It was a real pleasure.
Oh, it was great to have you. And just to, let everybody else know some of the other papers that rounded it out. We did have a presentation from the Litchfield Hills Archaeology Club, which we mentioned earlier. And for those of you, shameless plug, up in Northwest Connecticut and Litchfield Hills, they're an awesome group to check out. And we had Rob Wallace from the ASC. We had Ernie Wiegand talk about his Norwalk Community College program that Lee mentioned earlier. And then we had a student from CCSU, Joe, who works with Boy Scouts. And then Jeremy talked about his high school program. So he works at the public high school in Farmington, Connecticut, and he actually teaches, I believe it's a half semester or maybe half year archaeology program, and his students have done some really cool work under his supervision as well. So it was a great smattering of the different ways that, adults and youth can get involved in archaeology in the state.
Yeah, and I'd just like to point out that, Jeremy's program, I believe he sent at least 2 students from his classes over the years on to pursuing degrees in either anthropology or archaeology directly. So, I mean, that's a really cool program for younger kids maybe to show them the kinds of things and the kinds of jobs and the kinds of studies that are available under the archaeology umbrella.
So I thought maybe for the last few minutes we could talk about some of the current important projects going on in the state that have actually been fueled by avocational archaeology and volunteer archaeology. We've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years talking about a lot of different projects, and we've definitely touched on these. But a lot of the work that we've talked about has been largely done by professionals. A lot of it comes out of cultural resource management because it drives a lot of archaeological research right through development. And that's something that we can expect to increase dramatically as the country moves towards a push for infrastructure and things like that. But there are some really important projects that have contributed quite a bit to our understanding of Connecticut history and archaeology in the last few years that have really been fueled by avocational archaeologists and volunteer archaeologists with, guidance maybe and involvement of professionals and academics. But I think maybe we could talk for a few minutes about Templeton and Hollister and some of the older sites that have really kind of laid the groundwork.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about Paleo-Indians over the last few years just because there's been a lot of really cool research, and part of that has been at the Templeton site, which is out in Washington, Connecticut, in the western part of the state. Scott, could you talk a little bit about Templeton and how volunteers have played an important role at that site?
Sure. I mean, real briefly, like Sarah said, it's out in Washington, Connecticut. It's the second oldest site in Connecticut. For many, many years, it was the oldest Paleo-Indian site in the state. It is carbon dated to over 12,000 years ago, which makes it, and the unique thing about it is it's deeply buried, stratified site. So there's no real contamination of artifacts that came after 12,000 years ago because there's enough sterile soil in between the occupation levels. And Zach Singer went and looked at the work that was done there by Roger Moeller in the 70s and early 80s and kind of figured maybe there's still some more of the site out there, and with some of the new techniques we have, it would be interesting to go out there. And when he went out there, it was mostly volunteers to start with. So he reached out to a community of avocationals and really off-duty CRM people that would go out and dig. Subsequent to that, they added a component of the Western Connecticut State University Field School. And most field school students I consider as avocational. Most of the students there, even though they're doing an academic course and getting academic credit, are not going to pursue archaeology as a career. So, and it's their first time being in the field. So it's really an archaeological or an avocational experience for a lot of them. And it's a very interesting site. It's very deeply buried. So without the masses of volunteer hours that have been committed by avocationals, we would never be able to reach that paleo level. That paleo level oftentimes is more than 4 feet under the ground surface. And the group of avocationals that has been out there has been very successful at not only finding artifacts and finding artifacts in situ, in place, not digging and then putting them in a bucket and having to find them in the screen, which can be very important. They've also become pretty proficient at finding features. And features are a lot harder to find, especially as you get older and deeper. So these features can be just a stain in the soil. You might see a little differentiation of soil colors. And the avocationals and volunteers that have worked out there have been very efficient in finding them, being able to expose them, and then being able to photograph them, document them, draw them, bisect them. And because of that, there's a lot of information about that period of history here in Connecticut that we're learning about that we had no evidence of prior to this. And I think that, there was another dig that just recently ended out there. And I think that will, again, take us down the road and provide some new information about Paleo-Indian peoples here in Connecticut more than 12,000 years.
Hey guys, before our allotted time elapses, I just want to see if everybody we can go around the virtual roundtable and people can say how people, our listeners, can follow, be a part of them. Also, just want to put a shout out. So a listener writes in. So let me see if I got this right. ASC is the brains and FOSA is the brawn.
That's not so far off the truth.
I like that.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yes, when we go around, I think we should also, make it clear how people can join or get involved with these organizations as well. So for the Office of State Archaeology, you can follow us through our Facebook page and also at osa.uconn.edu.
Okay, for ASC, I think the easiest thing would be go to our website. That's ctarchaeology.org. And you can join there. If you want to communicate with anybody, just go to the About ASC tab, and you'll find all the boards of directors listed there. You can click on us and email us. So you can get us that way. And Mandy, I just wanted to say, Sarah, thanks for having us on this show. Archaeology has just been such a rewarding part of my life, and it's really great to be able to spread the word and offer that possibility to other people.
Yeah, FOSA has a website, fosa-ct.org, and you can find information about joining there. You can also follow us on our Facebook page. If you type in Friends Office Archaeology Connecticut, you'll come right up on it. And I apologize for stealing the last couple of minutes talking about Templeton.
No, it's fine. And I think, Mandy put it really well when she said that Connecticut was her archaeology family. And I think that, a lot of really good friendships and relationships and just a community comes out of being involved in the archaeology of Connecticut. And, we'd be happy to welcome any new members who would like to join us in that.
Yeah, and I think Mandy made a very salient and clear point that there is a function for you in this organization if you are interested. We will find something that fits your skill set and your desire of what you need to do or can do.
And Mandy, are you on Facebook or social media of any sort, or how do people find you?
Yeah, sure. If people Google my name, I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter. You can find me, friend me, whatever you want to do there. And I just want to offer this closing thought. I want to thank you, Sarah, Scott, Lee. It's been great to chat with you. And anybody, if you're sitting on the fence, jump onto our side. I mean, really, this community is amazing, and it's really made me who I am, and I miss it, and I encourage you to join it.
Well done. Hey, thank you, everybody, for being part of ICRB Radio. Thanks, Sarah, for leading us and for allowing us to explore archaeology of Connecticut. Thanks, everybody.